12. For most of his life, the world believed it understood Terry Bradshaw. He was the loudest voice in the room, the quarterback who never looked shaken, the man whose confidence felt so natural it seemed genetic. 4 Super Bowl rings with the Pittsburgh Steelers turned him into a symbol of American toughness, and long after he left the field, television cameras captured the same fearless energy. He laughed easily, joked about pain, and spoke as if pressure had never once touched him. To millions of fans, Terry Bradshaw didn't just survive football, he conquered it. But what people saw was only the version he allowed them to see. Behind the booming voice and effortless grin lived another man entirely. A man who, for nearly 30 years, woke up carrying a fear he could never explain and a sadness he didn't believe he was allowed to admit. While fans celebrated his strength, Terry Bradshaw was quietly fighting a war no one knew existed, one that couldn't be blocked, outrun, or overpowered. The mask was forged early. Drafted first overall in 1970, Bradshaw entered a league that devoured weakness. His early seasons were rocky, and Pittsburgh fans were merciless. Boos rained down. Sports writers questioned his intelligence, his leadership, his future. Each criticism hardened him. Instead of collapsing, he built armor. Confidence sharpened into defiance, humor used as a shield. By the time the Steelers became a dynasty in the 1970s, Bradshaw wasn't just winning games. He was proving something to everyone who had doubted him. That image followed him everywhere. When his playing days ended, television gave him a second act. On camera, he was fearless and funny, the larger-than-life former quarterback who seemed immune to insecurity. Week after week, millions invited him into their living rooms, never suspecting that the man making them laugh was privately struggling just to breathe through sudden waves of panic. Because long after the cheers faded, Bradshaw's body began betraying him. Without warning, his heart would race, his chest would tighten, and an overwhelming sense of dread would crash over him. These moments didn't come during high-pressure games or live broadcasts. They often arrived afterward, in quiet spaces where no one was watching. Success didn't protect him. In fact, it sometimes made things worse. Winning didn't bring relief. It brought exhaustion, followed by fear he couldn't name. So he did what men of his generation were taught to do. He stayed silent. In the culture that shaped him, quarterbacks were leaders, and leaders were supposed to be unbreakable. Admitting anxiety or despair wasn't just uncomfortable. It felt dangerous. Terry Bradshaw convinced himself that speaking up would shatter everything he had built. His reputation, his credibility, the respect of the fans who believed he was indestructible. And so he split himself in two. Public Terry smiled, joked, and powered through. Private Terry endured confusion, shame, and isolation, believing he was somehow failing at being the man the world expected him to be. Years passed, decades even. The symptoms didn't disappear. They deepened. By the late 1990s, the panic was joined by something heavier. Depression crept in slowly, draining his energy, stealing his appetite, and leaving him emotionally numb. The man known for filling rooms with sound found himself staring into silence, wondering why fame and fortune felt so hollow. Still, he kept performing. Still, no one noticed. That was the true double life Terry Bradshaw lived. Not a scandal, not a secret affair, but a relentless internal battle hidden beneath fame and laughter. He had spent his entire career proving toughness to the world, yet the hardest fight of his life was the one he was fighting alone. For nearly 30 years, Terry Bradshaw believed this was simply his burden to carry. He believed the world could never see him any other way. But silence, no matter how strong it seems, eventually cracks. And when it did, it would change everything, not just for Terry Bradshaw, but for how people understood strength, masculinity, and the hidden cost of being a legend. The breaking point didn't arrive with a dramatic collapse or a public scandal. It came quietly, the way most real reckonings do, when pretending became harder than telling the truth. For years, Terry Bradshaw had mastered the art of performance. He could walk onto a set, flip a switch, and become the man everyone expected. But off camera, the weight kept growing. The panic attacks returned without warning. The depression deepened. And for the first time, the idea that he might not survive this by sheer willpower alone began to scare him more than public judgment ever had. Eventually, Bradshaw did something that once felt unthinkable. He asked for help. Doctors put words to what he had been fighting for decades: clinical depression and anxiety. Hearing the diagnosis didn't weaken him. It explained him. Suddenly, the fear had a name. The darkness had a shape. And for the first time, he realized he hadn't been failing at strength. He had been enduring an illness in silence. Treatment helped, but it also forced a new question he couldn't ignore. How long could he keep living two lives? Every Sunday, millions still saw the smiling, confident broadcaster. But now, behind that smile was a man who knew how close he had come to being consumed by what he refused to acknowledge. The mask that once protected him started to feel dishonest. Not because he had lied, but because he had hidden a truth that might help others who were suffering the same way. When Bradshaw finally chose to speak openly, it wasn't calculated. It wasn't part of a brand. It was relief. He talked about the panic, the depression, the fear of being exposed as not tough enough. And instead of rejection, something unexpected happened. People listened. Fans wrote letters. Men who had never spoken about their own struggles said his honesty gave them permission to breathe. That was the moment the double life ended. Looking back, Bradshaw would admit the cruel irony. He had spent his career taking hits on the field without fear, yet the thought of admitting emotional pain terrified him far more than any defender ever could. Fame didn't shield him. Success didn't save him. And toughness, real toughness, turned out to be something entirely different from what he had been taught. The laughter, the jokes, the booming confidence were never fake. They were incomplete. They were survival mechanisms built in a time when men were told to swallow pain and keep moving. For 30 years, Terry Bradshaw did exactly that. And for 30 years, almost no one knew the cost. Today, his story isn't shocking because it reveals scandal. It's shocking because it reveals how easily suffering can hide behind success, how even the strongest-looking figures can be quietly unraveling, and how long someone can live divided before finally choosing honesty over image. Terry Bradshaw didn't lose his legacy when he told the truth. He expanded it. He became more than a champion quarterback or a television personality. He became proof that strength isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's the willingness to face them, even when the whole world expects you not to. And that is the part of his life no highlight reel ever showed. What came after the confession wasn't a victory lap. It was something far more unsettling: stillness. For the first time in his life, Terry Bradshaw stopped running from himself. No crowd to win over. No performance to lean on. Just long stretches of quiet where he had to sit with everything he'd buried for decades. And in that silence, another truth surfaced, one he had never fully confronted. Football hadn't just made him famous. It had trained him to hide. From a young age, he learned that pain was something you absorbed and moved past. Injuries were ignored. Doubt was laughed away. Fear was turned into fuel. That mindset built a champion, but it also built a prison. Because when the hits stopped coming from linebackers and started coming from his own mind, he had no playbook for survival. The habits that once kept him alive on the field nearly destroyed him off it. There were moments he questioned whether revealing the truth had been a mistake. Every honest word felt like a crack in the armor he'd worn his entire adult life. Some fans were confused. A few were disappointed. They wanted the legend, not the man. They wanted the joke, not the vulnerability. And for someone who had spent decades feeding expectations, that rejection stung deeper than he expected. But something else happened too, quietly and persistently. People began to recognize themselves in his story. Not the trophies, not the fame, the fear, the panic that arrived without reason, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Bradshaw realized his pain, once hidden out of shame, now carried weight far beyond his own life. As he aged, new anxieties emerged. Health scares, memory lapses, the unsettling awareness that the body, which once obeyed him without question, was changing. For a man whose identity was built on strength and control, this phase was terrifying. Not because of death, but because of irrelevance. Because if he wasn't strong, and he wasn't fearless, who was he supposed to be? This was the quiet aftermath no one talks about. After the confession, after the applause, after the headlines move on, Bradshaw had to learn how to live without the mask, and that was harder than wearing it ever had been. There were days when the old instincts kicked in, when he wanted to joke his way out of discomfort, to drown seriousness in humor. Sometimes he still did, but now he understood why. Humor wasn't dishonesty, it was defense, and knowing the difference gave him power he'd never had before. What makes Terry Bradshaw's story uncomfortable isn't that he struggled. It's that he succeeded while struggling, and no one noticed. It forces an unsettling question. How many others are doing the same? How many people we admire, envy, or idolize are quietly holding themselves together, afraid that honesty would cost them everything? For 30 years, Bradshaw believed silence was strength. It won championships. It built a career. It protected an image. But it nearly cost him his sense of self. Only when he stopped performing did he begin to heal, not completely, not magically, but honestly. Today, his legacy sits in two parts that can't be separated. The champion quarterback who stood tall in the biggest moments, and the man who finally admitted that strength alone wasn't enough. Together, they tell a story far more powerful than any highlight reel. A reminder that even legends can live divided lives, and that sometimes the bravest act comes long after the cheering stops. And perhaps that is the real ending of Terry Bradshaw's double life. Not exposure, not scandal, but acceptance. As the years passed, the public image of Terry Bradshaw evolved. He was no longer just the smiling, confident voice of NFL Sundays or the man whose arm had won 4 Super Bowls. The man who had once hid behind a mask of invulnerability now stood as something far more meaningful, a figure of honesty and vulnerability. But even as his story resonated with millions, he still faced battles of his own. The weight of aging and health struggles continued to press on him. With each passing year, the physical toll of playing in the NFL, combined with the mental strain he had battled for so long, became more pronounced. But through it all, he continued to speak out about his challenges, using his voice not just to entertain, but to educate. He shared his experiences, not as a lesson in strength, but as a reminder that being human, flawed, uncertain, and vulnerable was something to embrace, not hide. Bradshaw's journey became a story of reconciliation. It wasn't just reconciling with his own struggles, but also reconciling with the world around him. The world that once saw him as indestructible now saw him as relatable. Fans, who had once worshipped his toughness, now admired his bravery in confronting his fears. His story was no longer just about football. It was about something much larger, the quiet strength of accepting one's humanity. His openness also changed the way people viewed mental health, particularly among men. In a society that had long viewed emotional struggles as weaknesses, Terry Bradshaw was proving that vulnerability wasn't a sign of fragility, but rather, it was an act of incredible strength. His courage to speak about his depression and anxiety began to shift the conversation around mental health, opening doors for others to share their own stories without fear of judgment. Bradshaw's influence didn't stop at his fans. It reached beyond the television screen, touching the lives of those who were struggling in silence, just as he once had. People began to see that it was okay to not be okay, that it was okay to ask for help, to talk about your struggles, and to seek treatment without shame. His journey from silence to speech was not just personal healing. It was a beacon of hope for anyone who felt alone in their battles. But as much as his story resonated with others, it also left Bradshaw with a deeper understanding of himself. He came to terms with the fact that, despite everything he had achieved, he would always be a work in progress. The man who had once prided himself on controlling every aspect of his life now embraced the idea that not everything could be controlled. Not his health, not his emotions, and certainly not his past. What he could control, however, was how he chose to live in the present. As he grew older, Bradshaw found peace in the things that truly mattered. He leaned into his family, his faith, and his friendships. No longer burdened by the need to live up to a public image, he could simply be himself, a father, a grandfather, a friend, and a mentor. And in those roles, he found a sense of fulfillment that no football championship could ever bring. Today, Terry Bradshaw's legacy is not defined by the 4 Super Bowls or the countless accolades he received on the field. It's defined by his willingness to share his truth, to admit his struggles, and to help others find the strength to do the same. He may have spent the first part of his life living a double life, but the second part is marked by authenticity, humility, and a sense of peace that comes from embracing both the highs and the lows. In the end, Terry Bradshaw's story is a testament to the fact that even the strongest people need help sometimes, and that the truest measure of strength is not the ability to withstand pain, but the courage to face it, acknowledge it, and heal from it. Terry Bradshaw may have started as a legend on the football field, but he became a legend in life, showing us all that true greatness lies in the ability to embrace our imperfections and continue moving forward. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. As the years continued to unfold, Terry Bradshaw's journey became a profound reflection on the complexity of life itself. No longer just a retired NFL star or a beloved TV personality, he had transformed into a symbol of resilience. The courage to keep moving forward despite the shadows of mental health struggles, physical setbacks, and public expectations was no small feat. He had learned the most challenging lesson of all: to allow himself to be imperfect, to seek help when needed, and to embrace his own humanity. Bradshaw's impact went beyond football, beyond fame. He became a bridge for many who felt isolated by their own struggles, proving that healing could begin by simply acknowledging the pain, rather than trying to bury it. His openness about his mental health battles reached millions and resonated deeply in a world that often stigmatized such issues, especially in men of his stature. But perhaps most moving of all was the quiet way in which Terry Bradshaw came to terms with his identity. The world had built him into an icon of invincibility, but the real victory wasn't found in the public eye. It was in the private moments of self-acceptance, where he could admit his vulnerabilities without shame. These moments, though rarely shared in interviews or public appearances, were the true essence of his legacy. As he reached his later years, Bradshaw found joy in the simple things: time with family, quiet moments of reflection, and the comfort of knowing he had given everything to his sport and his fans. Yet he also understood that the greatest gift he could offer the world wasn't just his legacy on the football field, but the legacy of hope he had cultivated for others facing their own battles. The true meaning of strength had shifted for Bradshaw. It no longer meant remaining stoic or never showing cracks. It meant acknowledging those cracks, owning them, and still choosing to move forward. It meant leading by example, not just by winning games, but by teaching others that their struggles didn't define them. Through this understanding, Bradshaw became something even more powerful than a champion. He became a beacon for all those learning to live authentically. Terry Bradshaw's life, with all its highs and lows, will always be remembered as a testament to the courage it takes to stand tall, even when you feel small. His openness has allowed countless others to see their own pain reflected in his, and in that reflection, find the courage to heal. And in the end, that is the greatest victory. Not the Super Bowl rings, not the countless touchdowns, but the ability to be true to oneself, to be vulnerable, and to help others find the strength to do the same. Through his own battle with mental health, Terry Bradshaw has shown us that true greatness is not in winning every fight, but in fighting the battles that matter and inspiring others to do the same. Terry Bradshaw's double life is now a story of triumph, not just in the realm of football, but in life itself. And as he continues to live his truth, he reminds us all that no matter how many times we fall, the only thing that truly matters is how we rise, and how we help others rise with us. As Terry Bradshaw's journey unfolded in the years following his public revelations, his legacy evolved in ways no one could have predicted during his football career. He had spent much of his life in a spotlight that demanded perfection, a life where any sign of weakness could be perceived as failure. But in his later years, he began to redefine what it meant to be strong. The strength wasn't in hiding his struggles or in conquering every obstacle alone. It was in sharing his struggles openly, confronting his inner battles, and encouraging others to do the same. With each passing year, Bradshaw became more than just an icon of football or a TV personality. He became a living example of the power of vulnerability. He had proven that even someone with a reputation as large as his could suffer from mental health struggles, and that didn't make him any less of a person. If anything, it made him more human, more relatable, and ultimately more inspiring. His message resonated deeply with those who had, for years, felt ashamed to speak about their own emotional pain or mental health issues. But even as Bradshaw reached this new phase of self-acceptance, there were still moments of doubt, of wondering if he was enough in a world that constantly looked to him for strength. The public often forgets that even the most resilient people still face their own battles behind closed doors. And for Bradshaw, those battles were no different. He still struggled with his health, both mental and physical, and still questioned his role in a world that had once placed him on a pedestal of invincibility. The difference now, however, was that he had the courage to face those moments head-on, without pretending to be anything other than what he was. He continued to speak about his experience in interviews and public appearances, never shying away from his truth. But what was most powerful about Bradshaw's story wasn't just his willingness to share, it was the way he made others feel seen. People who had been battling silently for years suddenly found the strength to speak up. His words helped break down walls of silence and stigma, one conversation at a time. In his later years, Bradshaw found peace in the simpler things: family, friendships, and the quiet comfort of knowing he had given everything he had to both his fans and his legacy. As a grandfather, a father, and a mentor, he found joy in the connections he had built, in the lives he had touched, and in the healing he had inspired. He had learned to accept that his journey was ongoing, and that it was okay to still be learning, growing, and healing, no matter his age or status. While his fame may have originally been tied to touchdowns, Super Bowl victories, and his larger-than-life persona, Bradshaw's true legacy was now centered on something far more profound. It was in his willingness to share his story and inspire others to do the same. It was in his fight to break the silence surrounding mental health, to prove that even the strongest among us can struggle, and that asking for help isn't a weakness, it's an act of strength. His story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone might seem on the outside, they are still human on the inside, deserving of compassion, understanding, and love. His openness about his struggles created a ripple effect that reached far beyond his own circle, empowering countless others to face their own challenges with the same courage and openness that he had. In the end, Terry Bradshaw's life is a testament to the strength of vulnerability, to the importance of self-acceptance, and to the healing power of sharing our stories. The man who once lived a double life, hiding his pain behind a mask of toughness, has now become a living example that true strength lies not in concealing our struggles, but in facing them with honesty and compassion. Terry Bradshaw's story is far from over. He continues to live out his truth, inspiring generations to come. And perhaps the most profound message he leaves behind is this: we all have our battles, but by facing them with courage, compassion, and openness, we can create a world where no one has to fight alone. As Terry Bradshaw continued to embrace his vulnerability, his journey took on even greater significance. He had gone from being the football hero with a flawless public image to someone whose story became a source of solace for others. For those who had long felt that their struggles were theirs alone, Terry's openness gave them permission to seek help, to speak their truth, and to embrace their humanity without fear of judgment. Throughout this new chapter of his life, Bradshaw never sought to be an icon of mental health awareness. He didn't position himself as a guru or advocate for any cause. He simply shared his personal story, as honestly as he knew how. And in doing so, he unwittingly became a symbol for something much bigger than himself. He became a reminder that even those who appear the most invincible are, in reality, fighting battles that can't always be seen. His candidness continued to resonate with fans and the general public, especially with men who have been raised in a culture that often encouraged them to suppress their feelings. Bradshaw's legacy, in this new light, became a turning point for so many. The NFL legend who had once been untouchable now stood as a living example that mental health wasn't just an issue for those weak or fragile enough to admit their struggles. It was a part of life for everyone. While many saw his accomplishments on the field as the defining moments of his career, those who followed his story after retirement began to recognize that his true greatness lay in his ability to face his demons with authenticity. Bradshaw had not only conquered the world of football, he had conquered his inner turmoil, and he had done so in full view of the public. That was his real triumph. Years passed, and as he grew older, Terry found peace not just in his family or in his legacy, but also in how his journey had helped others find their own paths to healing. His honesty had changed lives, and he could look back with a sense of pride, not only for what he had achieved on the field, but for how his later years had shaped a different kind of legacy, one grounded in self-awareness, acceptance, and compassion. He would spend time with his family and loved ones. The people who had stood by him, watched him struggle, and helped him rebuild when he needed it most. It was in these quieter moments, away from the cameras and the spotlight, that he discovered the value of real connection. It wasn't the Super Bowl rings that defined his legacy anymore. It was the love and support he had fostered through honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to confront both the highs and lows of life with courage. Terry Bradshaw had lived a double life for years, but now, in his twilight years, he had come to accept that both versions of himself, the football legend and the man behind the mask, could coexist, and that ultimately made him whole. As he reflected on his life, Bradshaw's message became clearer than ever. True strength is not in perfection, but in embracing one's imperfections and using them to connect with others. His story wasn't just about being a quarterback, a TV personality, or a celebrity. It was about being human. And in that humanity, he found his greatest strength. The legacy Terry Bradshaw left behind will always be one of resilience, not because he was invulnerable, but because he was willing to be vulnerable. His message is simple yet profound. You don't have to face your battles alone, and it's okay to ask for help. Through his bravery in telling his own story, he gave others the courage to share theirs, creating a ripple effect that continues to change lives, one conversation at a time. Terry Bradshaw's double life is no longer a secret. It's a story of growth, healing, and transformation, a reminder that even the strongest can be fragile, but in embracing that fragility, we can find the strength to overcome anything life throws our way. His legacy, in the end, is not just the triumphs on the football field, but the healing he inspired, the conversations he started, and the courage he gave others to face their own struggles with honesty and grace.